Welcome to the Chief Strategy Officer podcast, a collaborative space for the architects of corporate success, chief strategy officers. In today's interconnected world, no single leader has all the answers. Here, we foster a platform for knowledge exchange where executives who lead strategy can share their unique experiences in tackling complex challenges, navigating disruptive technologies, and driving impactful growth. The CSO role can be lonely and misunderstood, but what if there was a network dedicated to your success? Outthinker Network provides a supportive community of leading chief strategy officers offering time-saving solutions, trend insights, and invaluable peer connections. Visit outthinkernetwork.com to unlock the full potential of your role. Welcome to another episode of the Chief Strategy Officer podcast. In today's episode, we're diving deep into the intricate process of designing and operating a successful strategy office. This is a critical discussion for any newly appointed CSO or those looking to fine-tune their existing strategy office. Our guests today are two seasoned CSOs who have been navigating the complexities of building strategy offices in different industries. We're joined by Roopa Unnikrishnan, the Chief Strategy and Innovation Officer at IDEX Corporation, and Eric Chesin, the Chief Strategy Officer at Anywhere Real Estate, who have both made significant strides in shaping the strategic direction of their organizations. In this episode, we explore how these leaders set up their strategy offices from the ground up, how they adapted to the evolving needs of their industries, and the challenges they faced along the way. We'll discuss the importance of aligning with the CEO and the board, building the right team, and maintaining agility in a constantly changing business environment. We discuss how do you determine the focus areas for a strategy office, tips for managing stakeholders and building relationships and influence, 4 filters for managing the capacity of the strategy office by deciding what problems you should be working on and which ones you should say no to, the 3 things every CSO should do when they get promoted to the role or start at a new company. Join us as we uncover the strategies and insights that have helped these leaders successfully navigate the complexities of their roles and drive meaningful change within their organizations. Ladies and gentlemen, Roopa Unnikrishnan and Eric Chesin. Well, Eric, Roopa, thank you so much for being here. I'd like you to open up with each of you just briefly introducing yourself, just, your name and your company and a little bit of background about you. Maybe I'll start with Roopa.
Hi, folks. I'm Roopa Unnikrishnan. I'm the Chief Strategy and Innovation Officer at IDEX Corporation. We are an industrial firm focused on manufacturing components across the industrial, diversified industrial spaces. In my past, I've been a Chief Strategy Officer at Vontier, which was in the industrial but mobility world, Harman, which was in electronics and automotive, Pfizer, pharma, and Citibank and BlackRock, which was in financial. So appropriately, I've lived in a diversified world. I've just been promoted about a few months ago into the strategy and innovation role. In the past, I also had M&A, and we are sort of really looking to amp up organic growth here at IDEX.
I love that. I mean, the connection between pharma, technology, mobility, and what you're doing now is going to be interesting to see what that thread is that brings them all together. Thank you.
First, Roopa, you and I have met before, spoken before, but I've never heard you run down the depth of your chief strategy officer experience across companies. So I'm humbled to be part of the conversation. And Kayan, it's schedule aside, it's a privilege. It always is a privilege to talk with you, and certainly a privilege in this context. I'm Eric Chesin. I'm the chief strategy officer at Anywhere Real Estate. We're a residential real estate firm, large real estate brokerage. We own brands underneath an umbrella brand you might not. So we are Coldwell Banker, Century 21, Sotheby's International Realty, Better Homes and Gardens Real Estate, ERA, and Corcoran. And we fill out the full service of residential real estate. So we also own a title company, the joint venture with a mortgage company, own a corporate relocation company as the breadth of our services, which makes for particularly interesting strategy. So it's a lot of fun to sit in the seat that I'm in. Before joining my company now, I started my career in management consulting and spent some time in the disruptive innovation space. mostly startup and PE-backed businesses trying to launch new products and new businesses. And it's a privilege to be here.
Excellent. The topic here is establishing, setting up, designing your strategy office. And before I start the questions, I'd just like to give each of you to just share a little bit of background on how you entered into the strategy office. Did the strategy office exist before? Did you create it from scratch? What did you do before you joined your current firm? And just to reverse the order a bit, I'll start with Eric.
Before Anywhere, which was not called Anywhere, when I joined it, we were called Realogy.
Right.
But before that, I had come in from these disruptive innovation roles. At the time, I was running my own firm with a business partner, had found my way into the company at a super interesting, it always seems like a super interesting time. The residential real estate space right now is in massive flux, which makes things fascinating. And it was at the time that I joined too. We did not have a formal strategy department when I joined the company. So in that sense, I was able to help shape one. We even came up with the term strategy office, which turns out was not that novel, but we thought we came up with it. And around that time, Kion, you and Outthinker had a relationship with our company that predated me, which was hugely beneficial as we shaped a bit of what we wanted to build and do. And so over the course of now coming up on 8 years, we've been constantly evolving what it means to run a strategy department. What are the other areas of work that make the most sense to group underneath the strategy umbrella? And how do you best support a company in an industry with a strategy function that allows for the kind of agility where you can focus on what really matters, while at the same time provides the kind of structure that allows for a company to strategically function. So really fascinating, and happy to dive into more wherever it's helpful.
So we got a new company for you, a new function that didn't exist before in an industry that's both established, maybe one of the oldest industries there, but also is facing disruption. So it's going to be great to learn how you decided to assemble what the function should be in that situation.
The brilliance of that is I think we've all learned over time, every company is facing disruption, is at an interesting flux, an interesting point. And it's always that key. Anytime you ask anyone who works in any strategic role, they will very honestly say, oh my God, it's a fascinating time for our industry and the company's facing so much disruption. And I think that's just because it's the nature of the beast.
Yeah. So there's a short answer and the long answer. The short answer was that no, the role didn't exist here at IDEX. It had existed more than a decade ago. And I think there was initially a little bit of an allergic reaction to a strategy team, even at the central level, partly because of that experience. It had, I think, was very much a reporting, here's a template, fill it out kind of feeling. And so when I started talking with Eric, I think he was sussing out the folks, Eric, our CEO, Eric Chesin, he had actually started testing to understand the type of strategy folks out there. And my tendency tends to be really thinking about the shareholder sort of perspective and the end market technology perspective, which was very different and new, right? Different certainly from their past. So what he did, interestingly, was he went out, he spent a couple of months playing chief strategy officer role, and he had a couple of folks who were operational, but very strategic, so operational leaders with a strategic bent, brought them over to the center, had them think with him. And he realized that, he felt like he molded it so that he felt strongly enough that a chief strategy role truly was required. And as I came in and I advocated in our conversations that an M&A needs to actually be very deeply intertwined. So we created a chief strategy and M&A role. And because M&A at that point we had been pretty desultory in how we'd actually used M&A for growth. So I came in and I said, let's start with all of that in one umbrella. We can talk about later what we want to do. So we crafted the role around building strategic tools and capabilities in the organization and having M&A be deeply intertwined so that the tools could actually generate the insights and go right into creating a cultivation funnel into M&A. So that's how I designed it, is strategy, cultivation, and M&A. I had a couple of folks focused on cultivation as well. now, as you know, the M&A group has stabilized and is actually we've done a great deal. We've actually had, as of to date, 6 deals in the last 3 years that we've executed. 80% of it proprietary, that we've actually generated and cultivated. We're feeling pretty good that now we have that under control. And so in one of our annual reviews, we sort of said, what IDEX really needs and wants and should excel at is organic growth. So really turning the focus back to innovation now. And hence my role has evolved to Chief Strategy and Innovation Officer. So, you need to really understand what's the need and the history here, right, of any company you're going into and mold it. And ideally, I know when you're joining a company, you rarely have the opportunity to mold it that much. I mean, I was fortunate in the multiple conversations that I had. And of course, Eric's real focus on making this work and be a high value add role. So actually, and I know one of the questions you were going to ask, and I don't want to preempt it, but I think having a CEO who's deeply committed and thoughtful about the problems to be solved and the change you want to see, because I think at some level, a chief strategy officer actually tends to be a chief transformation and change officer as well, right? So that's part of, I think, why I have this unique opportunity here.
So what I hear you saying is that it was really the CEO whose foresight or prioritization informed what the strategy office needed to do, and that has evolved. Eric, would you say that was true for you? Because my understanding is you came in under a prior CEO and then had a new CEO. So kind of what I'm getting at is the strategy office can do so many things. It can do M&A, it can do KPIs, it can be an internal consulting group, it could be reporting to the board, it can be so many things. And how do you pick and choose what informed what the strategy office meant to focus on?
It's fine. Very similar, I think, to Roopa's answer, despite the fact that I joined about a year before our current CEO joined. And a lot of what shaped what we are today is very much his vision. But I had a 11-month head start on trying to shape what it is we were going to do. I think it as much tracks to what the CEO, what the board, and what the strategy team molds to do, as it does the roller coaster of where the company or industry's needs are. So just Roopa, as you'd suggested, you start out realizing you may have more of a inorganic M&A need for the business. So let's focus central strategy around M&A. And then you realize our needs are adjusting to more organic. Now let's anchor the strategy role around innovation and organic. I found us in the same way. So if I trace back the years that I've been with the company, the pendulum of how much time we have spent on organic business strategy versus how much time we've spent on a little more inorganic, call it corporate strategy, whether it's M&A or other, kind of rise above the movements of the business and think about how you want to architect the business. It really maps to shifts in the industry, we move with the market. We're in residential real estate. When the housing market booms, you run one type of company. When the housing market is where it is today, you just are going to need to run a slightly different type of company. And so the power of a strategy department is really to be able to bob and weave to where the business needs something today. And so I found the percentage of our contribution that is, core innovation, we need to be coming up with new growth strategies for our individual brands and businesses, was like 80-90% of our time for the first few years, and is now a way lower percentage of at least my time as I focus on corporate strategy.
I'm sorry, what was coming to mind for me is sort of like a 2x2 matrix. Your CEO is very hands-on, or shocking, right? Exactly. Very hands-on or not very hands-on. And it sounded in both of your cases, your CEOs at least had an informed an opinion about what the strategy role should be. I guess the other dimension would be, you both talked about sensing what the company needs. And maybe the CEO, knowing each of you individually, I would assert, you're not just going to do what the CEO says is important. You're going to say, I think that this is what is important. So the other dimension would be, the CEO is focused on the right things, or wants the strategy to be focused on the right things, or it's not. So you kind of have this 2x2. So my question is kind of where in that box were you, and how do you get to the right box?
So I think I'll go ahead. Kayan, you've known me a few years. I think it would have been hard for me to join a company where the expectation was that I just do what the CEO asked me.
Right.
And many CEOs are extremely, expert at what they do, but there's a reason they need somebody in this role. Because part of the way I work is I also go and sort of build strong relationships, collaborative relationships across the organizations, which means that there will be things, ideas that are floated to me, insights that come to me that may not actually get to a CEO because of the role that the CEO plays, right? So I think in many ways, building a trusted relationship with the CEO so that you're able to engage on tough questions. Honestly, in Eric's case, he has thought a whole bunch of them. So what I might actually be doing is providing sort of some amount of course corrective, like, what is that? The sort of little rocket that's in the edge of the larger missile, right? That just allows a little bit of a course, the thruster, the gyroscopic thruster that allows to correct direction or make a subtle shift. So either way, with subtle or not, sometimes even with the big ideas, you want to actually spend time influencing the leader. And if I'm going into an environment where my job is just to execute, I know that both sides of this party would be chaotic.
Right. Yeah, that's great. I love that thruster metaphor. And kind of where we're headed to is it's not just the CEO who says what the strategy officer do. There are all these other stakeholders. But as we step into that, Eric, because what's interesting with your situation is that you had a new CEO a year after you joined, and you had to negotiate a relationship. Can you talk to us a little bit about what that process was of negotiating the understanding from the new CEO as to what your office should be focused on or how it should be structured or any element of its design?
Sure. And the answer, ours was a bit natural and a bit non-prescriptive, I'd say by default, because I was 1 year in, which is still relatively new in a sort of hectic shifting time. When a business goes through a CEO change, you have all of that craziness, which just creates enough upheaval that there's time to kind of readjust. And we used about the first 6-8 months of our CEO's acclimation as a super deep dive, deeper than I had been able to go the year before, on all of the market forces and elements of the strategy of the business. And so it started almost like a level playing field, both on what our strategy was and how to run the team. The guiding force throughout had been to be non-prescriptive about what the strategy office is responsible for, to allow for that kind of agility. And so I fought the urge a bunch to like overly script. Our team does this and not this. We take responsibility for this and not this. There's always the question organizationally, which pockets of teams are part of the strategy office and which are not, and what does that imply about the role the strategy office plays? And for the first 4 or 5 years, we were a tiny, mighty team that was an influence on all of those departments, but not oversight. It's shifted in the last few years, especially as we've all kind of defined the leadership team's relationships and everyone kind of knows what folks do. And our team has taken on a bunch of more specific operating responsibilities. But for a while, it was almost intentional. Just keep things super small and targeted to be able to just dive into the areas needed. And then on the relationship with the CEO, Roopa, it sounds very similar. So our company is blessed with a brilliant CEO who is strategy first. His mantra is always, if 80% of my time is not on either strategy or talent, then I'm doing something wrong as a CEO, is sort of his views on leadership. And he can see around corners and he understands strategy and he knows he wouldn't be doing his job correctly if he just presumed I would do what he asked me to do. And so not only am I out trying to unblock him from views that he may be uninformed on or help direct him into the right places, but there's also, and I don't know, Roopa, if you see this too, there's always an element of strategy teams' downfall can be if they're viewed as the henchman for the CEO. And while you have having that, it's the best word for it, the halo of knowing I speak for the CEO. And if we're trying to get something done, it is at the behest of the CEO. That can be pretty much a double-edged sword. And in order to truly serve the company, you need a little bit of independence. So you can build your relationships across the business. You can source and develop strategic imperatives independent of the CEO just told me to go do a thing. That's the best way to serve the CEO and the board, but it's also the only way to ensure that your strategy isn't just the fiat from above and it gets no buy-in and can't be executed and, ends up being unsuccessful. In our case, even if our CEO kind of knows where we're going to end up, he will intentionally stand behind rather than in front of me so that I can do a little bit more of a full team development exercise in order to end in a place that was more collaborative. And he can be very insightful about when that's needed or when you need that sort of CEO voice to come down from on high.
Yeah, I guess you have multiple bosses, right? You've got the CEO, you've got your other stakeholders, you've got what you feel like the company needs. And if you have a collaborative relationship with your CEO, as you both do, the CEO can kind of step in or step back. But how do you gracefully negotiate what the office should do and should not do? I think particularly should not do, because one thing that we have experience with other members of Outthinker is you can kind of become the place where, Roopa and Eric, they've got a team that will just work into the night just to do everything. And you have to be able to say, no, this is not what I do. How do you train the organization to know what to not use you for?
I think of everyone as a collaborator in many ways. If there is a boss, I'd say it is the CEO and the board, and in that frame, right? Because I think of it in the value that my group or I can provide as being truly long-term total shareholder returns and growth and value, right? So that's my charter, is institutional organizational growth. So if you should really work, I really work pretty hard to not be an order taker, because that can, like you mentioned, that can sometimes become, by default, a strategy office. Hey, have you thought of this question? Isn't this question interesting? Well, let me help you think about the question and give you the way to think about it. And then I'm happy to talk about it. And you should now be pitching why this is a great thing for the company and the enterprise to do, rather than, I've told her that and now she's going to go work it, right? So you've got to set that frame for people. And in reality, like over the last 3 years, I built a team, built out tools and capabilities, and now push them into the businesses. So each 5 groups that in our business, each of them now has a strategy lead who had initially reported into me, as a way to make sure that the problem solving thinking happens there. And then it's really about enterprise growth at my level. So it is, you have to be intentional. You have to be willing to say, great, now you do it. Right? What do you think, Eric?
Especially if part of this conversation is targeted to, I'm a, newly appointed chief strategy officer. How do I structure a team? It is the set expectations early about how do you unlock the capacity, which is often a really sought after, highly valued capacity of high performing strategic leaders who can focus on a problem. And so one very tactical thing is, if you keep a team super small, then nobody will presume that you have endless capacity, which means you could say no to any request without insulting. And so a real tiger team will almost definitionally have the excuse to pick and choose where you point those guns. That only goes so far, though. We have a core strategy team. And to describe how I manage their capacity, I imagine there's 3 reasons that they take on, or 4 reasons that they might take on work, or that I would encourage them to take on work. One is it's at the behest of the CEO of the board. And that it's my job to manage the capacity of those expectations for the CEO, but that's easy. It's one person, you work closely with them, and you both kind of have a sense for what's the highest and best use of this team. Another is it's just a really important, good idea to go after that this team or I have collectively decided this is a good use of the time we go. A third area is It does come from outside of the CEO of the board or that purpose. It comes from some other team members. And it is an opportunity to build trust and appreciation with others in the business. Presumably, it's also strategic, but everything's strategic. And so if some business unit leader comes in and says, I have this problem, sometimes I'll say, yeah, let's go run at it, specifically because that's a terrific way to support and build trust to an important stakeholder or leader, knowing that no matter what it is we do, you're never going to have an impact unless that person is on board with the outputs of your team and the kind of work that you do. And that's a pretty common reason that I will direct the team's energy towards something. You just can't do it all the time and set the expectation that we're here, we're order takers, as you put it. The fourth is that it develops the team. So I will often find an opportunity for someone to take on a leadership role, usually themselves directly with a senior leader who's not the CEO or the board across the business. Go support that person with this problem, because that creates the next generation of leaders who either, Roopa, can go be a strategy leader for a business unit like the structure you've done, or in our case, we'll export talent into operating roles all the time, but you need to have both built those reputations and do that work. And so I'm very happy to unlock the capacity of the team for any of those four reasons. And the question is always the balance, to make sure that on the whole, you're still spending a good chunk of that team's capacity on best and highest use for the company.
One of the jobs to be done, if you will, for the strategy office is to create talent for the company, is what I'm hearing you say.
At least for us,
Would you say
yes.
that's true?
And man, is that a blessing. So I've been with the company about 7.5 years. And it's both my belief and everyone that I work with's belief is that by far my greatest contribution to the performance of the company are the people I had the privilege of introducing into the business. Folks that I can hire who have a very strong and often pretty rare skill set in strategy, which in some industries it's just not the normal path. And so to be able to insert that skill set and provide a crash course in my sector, right? People learn real estate because they're in our team and they're focused on it. Now all of a sudden you have these amazing leaders who have the balance of that strategic background and then core experience within our company and industry. And the folks that have come out of my team have been massively successful, growing in operating responsibility, GM type responsibility, as well as in strategy responsibility. And so to me, it's like the greatest privilege of the work is I've got pretty exciting jobs to sell when we recruit, because we've got the board and we've got the CEO and we're a market leader in our space. And the space itself is fascinating because it touches the economy and the world. And so you can get a really good pitch for why to come join the company and join the company through this route. And I think then you can punch above your weight a bit on the quality of the talent that then you can develop into the future leaders for the company.
There's so many directions that I'd love to take the conversation, but we don't have time to go on all of them. But I'm kind of summarizing it as you have now aligned with the board and leadership and your understanding with the company of what the remit should be for now. And that evolves, as in the case with Roopa, from inorganic towards organic, for example. But then you need to then take the next step of designing the company, the office. So how do you think about what's the checklist of things that a new chief strategy officer should think about in designing the office?
For us, at least, the anchor is with a board of directors as our audience, a core strategy development articulation function. And for that, there's an annual cadence to it. Our business, and we shaped it a bit, but our business has there's a big annual meeting in June. And you have a full season working up toward that. And then these quarterly and sometimes even monthly touch points for which there's updates and requirements.
Sorry, how long is that season that you're working up to that?
Each year we do it, we talk about how that year is endlessly unique because the stakes are so high, including this year. But we'll kick that off in February for something in June, sometimes even January. And it's always a little different, but there is a deep, just strategic dive into data and market forces and updating our understanding from the previous year, shifting the way we tell the story of what's important and what's not, and understanding, what's been thrown at us that was different. That whole process, which is more and more collaborative each year with other leaders in our business, ends with a written strategy that then creates a whole new cadence of cascade following that session with our board and into, company-wide communications of our strategy. That whole calendar, which really is a full year, to me provides the backbone of a certain percentage of the requirements of our strategy team. And the magic is, how agile can I maintain the other percentage, as opposed to being too structured and regimented on all the other things you got to get done. And so, that might be 50, 60% of the strategy team's true capacity eaten up by that process. And that process spurs tons of other bits of work that add value in a million different ways, but that's its core. The other types of things that we would focus on, that's where I find it most important not to get stuck in a structured set of obligations. We spent a year or two where we were an incubation arm for new products. It really made sense for the business at the time, and the business needed it. We named it, and we would launch products into the business and then hand them off once they've been incubated a bit. And super proud of that work, and a ton of great things come out of it. We don't really do that much anymore because the business doesn't need it. And so I tried to avoid an overly structured calendar of, here's the list of projects in our pipeline, here are the ones that we've launched, because that would just be a self-fulfilling, I guess that's how we spend our time type of work. And these days, there's a lot more thinking on some outside in M&A, and the team's focused on it, but we're a little less prescriptive on what are the KPIs for success this year outside of that backbone that we know kind of keeps the calendar running and the collaborative strategic process alive.
Got it. Yeah. So you've got this kind of annual rhythm and two different seasons, and you have one season which is very focused and prescriptive because it's leading up to the board. And then the other season is you get to choose the structure. I was going to say unstructured. It's not unstructured, but you get to choose the structure.
Sort of. I would end it slightly. I can't control what you call the other season about on or off, and whether it's between February and June, or, I choose how to spend the next 6 months, because we direct ourselves at where the company needs us most, and that has no calendar on it. And also, the period of time that isn't that core strategy development season is not the only part of that calendar for us. We do a lot of work on the strategy cascade and communication, which then flows, after that period. And there's meaningful and pretty regular, we use the board updates as our excuse for maintaining and updating and articulating the adjustments in that strategy. So it is a year-round bit of capacity. So I wouldn't bucket them as, I don't know, for us, it's not this period of time versus this period of time. It's a base level of capacity dedicated to a prescribed set of things we do. And then the additional capacity left agile enough to fill it in throughout the year on where the need is, most pronounced.
And I think, again, the thing I would add is, yes, I think, if annual cadence doesn't exist, and I've been in some companies where it didn't quite exist, it was just we had to just refresh last year's strat. And I'm going to do that with my team in 2 weeks. And you kind of have to sort of push to say, probably won't give you the kind of transformations you're looking for, right? So you do have to decide how you're going to set up the right cadence. The other piece then is how do you build the right resources? So to your point, my first 90 days came in, recognized that there are some capabilities and some lags. So establishing what the capability lags were, understanding what was possible. We are 50 business units, and anything from 60 million to 200 million, right, in revenue. So you really are establishing where some strategic, responsibilities might live in the organization. Hence the community that I created, 40 people across the organization. They didn't report to me. Not many of them had strategy in their title, but I said kind of 1 point people there. So almost my first job was creating the strat community. So that was a capabilities piece. And then the cadence of establishing how to use our annual meeting. So, it went from, hey, let's just present out, to ones where over the last 3 sessions, we've actually taken a day and used it for strategic workshopping and training, training scenario planning, right? Never been done. Training the top 150 folks around those things. So really understanding how to use those meetings in a way that works for the overall annual cadence. And then on the informal piece, I think some of it is, how do you create, if you come in and find an extremely formal organization, IDEX is a formal manufacturing organization, right? So if you're coming into that, knowing that you kind of have to formalize the informal as well. So we have an investment committee that meets monthly. So that gives people a target. As if you're going to do some work or around strategic opportunities, aim to try and get it in front of a IC. And Eric and I, over the last year, we would do quarterly reviews of what we called tollgate work. That's market analysis that are into interesting new spaces. So their teams and strategists had a target point to say, okay, second month, middle of the month, there's going to be a quarterly session around TGs. That's when I want to come in and bring my best and brightest strategic ideas, right? So you kind of create a formal to make the informal work as well. So those would be some of the elements I sort of put into play here.
Yeah, I'm so curious to understand this strategy community concept is fascinating. I know that we only have a little bit more time with you, and I want to make sure that we get into some of the very specific tactical things that a new CSO could do. But Roopa, do you mind just describing briefly the strategy community concept?
Yeah. So I came in and, a lot of businesses that have a history of having somehow been associated with Danaher, they tend to have a business services group. And they look at operational processes, right? And so when I came in, I found that those processes were very strong here at IDEX, makes us great at optimization and 80/20, for example, which then also meant that there wasn't an appetite for just coming in and saying, hey, best practice around innovation. You need to, have a ideation toolkit. You need to be able to have a toolgate process to progress your idea. If I had come in and establish processes, I'd have actually, and I recognized early, had pushback. So I wanted actually to have people replace the process fulcrum with the people fulcrum. So rather than impose new people into the mix, I said, let's go find people who are trusted in the businesses, who are actually leaning forward to set strategy up and make them part of a broader community so I can teach them the skills, which may have some processes included in them, rather than saying, here's this new chief strategy officer who's come in and given them 6 ways to think about the world that they never had before. It would have been overpowering and I'd have had absolute organ rejection. So use the people fulcrum. And so it integrated them. We meet monthly. We talk about macroeconomics. We talk about, the Dublin method for innovation. We, have how to accelerate your technology roadmap. We cover the gamut of what's needed to do very strong strategy without it feeling like here's a process, right? So that's the tool I used. You have to flex for the organization you're part of.
Yeah. That's why I love one of the things I love about the strategy function, as opposed to, say, finance or accounting or operations, is that it necessarily needs to be so collaborative, and the vocabulary that you use needs to be propagated because you're doing a lot of collaboration, education, coordination, as opposed to like, hand it off to me, I'll do it, and then hand it back to you. And I love that both of you have found a way to integrate into the overall system. Again, I got so many questions, but I know we are reaching the top of our time with you. I'd like you to just put yourself in the heads of a newly appointed chief strategy officer. What would be the top 3 things, or it could be 2 things or 5 things, that you think that this person needs to evaluate or execute to put them on the path to success? Eric, why don't we start with you?
All right, let's see if I can be succinct with 3. I think if you're newly appointed into new company or new industry, buying yourself the time to deeply understand the company's strategy is going to be crucial. And just as we've talked about before, where you are in the roller coaster of where to dedicate a strategy team's resources depends on a deep understanding of where the company sits and where the industry sits. And so you've got the time and the privilege to do a deep dive into strategy before you've designed exactly where you're going to dedicate the team's energy. I think that's a great first start. I think establishing the trust and expectations with your manager, whether it's the CEO or somebody else in the company, about what the baseline sets of requirements are, those might be pretty steady despite anything else that might move. And so laying that out almost one-to-one as opposed to by some broad, company-wide communication. That's probably number 2. And then number 3 is to understand, right or wrong, what the expectations on you from everyone who's not your manager are. So get to know deeply and build trust with your peers / stakeholders, wherever you sit in the organization, and listen before telling what it is your team's going to do. Because it's only once you're equipped with that you can get off on the right foot. Even if you have to say no, you kind of need to know what everybody else believes this amorphous, ambiguous, quote unquote, strategy department is there to do before you can shape and design, what's the best and highest use for the company.
I love interacting with both of you because I expect a response and what I get is different and so thoughtful. So thank you for that. That was awesome. Roopa, how about you?
I would say all of what Eric said. I think the one thing I would perhaps add is appetite, right? Appetite for change, appetite for investment growth. So, part of what you kind of have to start doing early and is a little bit of breadcrumbing. Yeah, I have a favorite company I think they would do so fabulously inside of our company. And I would love for us to buy it. And it would help them and us strategically. They're pretty large, right? So, in the context of the investments we made in the past. So I started early, like in the first year, I did the analysis. So the strategic analysis is on point. It's just a question of, are they ready? Are we ready to firstly take that strategic path and make that investment? So I once a year or so, I resuscitate that conversation and, our CEO engages. We've had a point where the CEO and the head of the board engaged. We weren't quite ready. It was just, the street may not have accepted it from us. We may not have may not be at the point yet, but I keep the foot on that pedal quite often or tap that pedal quite often just as a way to say, are we ready now? Right. So there's that. Is there an appetite to do startup investments? Is there an appetite to engage around a different type of talent profile? So test early, understand where the world's at within your context of your world, and decide, how often do you want to go back and tap that pedal as a way to prep the organization. Because there are going to be things you see that just come glaring out at you because you, as a strategist, you can take that objective view of, what's the right answer, what's the best answer. Put it in the back of your mind because you have to live in the context of today, but then keep testing, right? So,
yes. Yeah. And what I'm coming out of this conversation is it's not about finding the right answer and then executing it. It is the kind of the collaborative coming up of the answer. And it is almost that if you come up with the answer with other stakeholders, then it becomes the right answer. But it's a communal thinking activity that you need to be the catalyst for. Any particular tools or resources or journals or that you suggest a new strategy officer turn to? Anything that you found particularly useful?
Well, I would say there's find yours. We have an approach called the TG approach, which helps you do a deep dive on markets and make it something that really is as holistic as possible. Things about cyclicality, etc. Right? So that I think is important so that both you and your teams are thinking holistically about whatever problem you're going after. And the other is I do have a couple of tools like, there's bright ideas for ideation, etc. that I make sure. And then I don't know that I keep a journal per se, but podcasts. I love my podcasts and I keep them pretty varied. I mix them up a little, anything from FT and The Economist to my Daily Morning, which is the journal, and NPR. And sometimes it's like Freakonomics. And, wait, don't tell me. You want to mix it up so that you're trying to keep yourself. And then there's a whole slew of technology podcasts as well. So they're my favorite tool for pushing myself into interesting spaces.
Love it. Question: when do you listen to these podcasts? Sounds like morning, or how do you get this level of consumption?
I have a dog. I'd say for the best CSO, you go get yourself a dog, and then you have 3 walks a day.
Love it.
And then I fly a lot, right, for my work. So I hit download, and there you go. I got all kinds of time.
Love it. All right, there's the conclusion. Get a dog and listen to podcasts while you walk the dog. I love it. Eric, what about you? What any specific tools, resources, journals that you
I'm
recommend?
not sure if this is an on-point answer to the question, but hopefully it's helpful. No specific, journal or podcast or something that I've listened to regularly that I've found solves for us. But two things I'd suggest. One is that earlier the better. I make sure that I've understood and have a very frequent cadence of incoming of the right kind of dashboard for our business. So any business has too many dashboards, too many metrics, and it's kind of hard for anyone to distill it down to the 5 things that matter, which is why you need a strategy team. I make sure that I'm very up to date on the metrics that matter for our business, even if they're normally owned by our finance team or they're normally, reported on by our business team, because I need to understand that to be able to articulate, be nimble enough, be agile enough as we go through the day-to-day. So it's a little bit of quick work early on just to make sure, put me on the weekly cadence of the following 6 things and or help, find someone who can summarize that into the things that matter. I found that to be really useful. And when I've failed at that, I can often realize I'm a step behind on something. And that can destroy a whole bunch of both trust and value of what our team can deliver. The second tactic I've fallen into more in the last few years was, especially for leaders on my team who I know are both brilliant and can spot things others might not. I've been very explicit that a minimum of 10% up to 20% of their time is theirs to direct. So it doesn't matter how much we pile up of the required work or the cadence, or you have these 4 projects going on. I have an expectation that they are chasing the things they find to matter with that additional capacity. And whether it's in a regular one-on-one or otherwise, that's the real spark of net new, not told to me by my CEO or not sparked because of some number that we end up creating. The most strategic things I've found that we've done have come from giving someone else smarter than me the room to be innovative with their thinking. And then they, I've been listening to this thing and I really think we should focus on X, and that out of that blooms so much. And structure wise, that just means being pretty regimented about carving out that amount of these folks' capacity to be able to bloom like that.
I love that. That's great. Albert Einstein said that play is the ultimate form of research. I think if you walk your dog and you're taking information in, then you let it sort of ruminate and let your curiosity follow you, then your strategy office can look around corners. So it all fits together. Roopa, Eric, thank you so much for taking the time to talk with us and spend time with us here. It was great to learn from you.
Thank you for including us.
What a pleasure.
Appreciate it.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Chief Strategy Officer podcast. To join our community of strategy leaders, visit outthinkernetwork.com/apply. Until next time, let's keep the conversation going and rewrite the future of strategy together.